I was 7 when we moved into an old house. We got it cheap because the previous tenants had left abruptly. My mother said they moved to another city, but the neighbors always glanced at our house strangely, like they knew something we didn't. The rooms were tall and cold. The wooden ceilings creaked at night. The floors were old planks that groaned under each step. My mother would say old houses make noises. There's nothing to fear. But at 7, fear doesn't need a reason. It all began the day I noticed a shadow in my room. I was playing alone as usual with my toys, a tiny army of plastic soldiers, cars, and dolls. The shadow was in the corner and it didn't move. At first I thought it was a trick of the light or a tree branch outside. But the branches were by the window, not here. I blinked and the shadow didn't move. When I blinked again, it vanished. My heart pounded. It's just my imagination, I told myself. But my gut told me otherwise. That night I heard whispers while lying in bed. Someone softly said my name. I pulled the blanket over my head, shaking. The next morning I told my mom and she laughed. Maybe it was just a dream. It wasn't a dream. A few days later, while I played alone, one of the small dolls rolled across the floor toward me. I hadn't touched it. A voice whispered behind me, soft but clear. I did it. I spun around. The room was empty. But the voice was real and it felt alive. For weeks I believed it was my imaginary friend like kids have sometimes. But this friend was different. He or it moved my toys, laughed faintly, and sometimes just stood in the shadowy corner watching me. Slowly, things started to change. The voice became less friendly. Sometimes it laughed. Sometimes it said, "Mom is asleep. Your sister is awake. I'll always be with you." At night, I could feel it moving in the room. The floor creaked under its invisible steps. The window rattled slightly, though there was no wind. And sometimes I would feel it sitting on the edge of my bed, staring silently. One night, when I was almost asleep, I heard nails dragging across the floor near my pillow. I froze, my heart hammered. When I opened my eyes, nothing was there. The next morning, I found tiny scratches on my pillow, like someone had dug their nails into the fabric. My mother scolded me, saying I probably did it while playing with my toys. But I knew I hadn't. My little sister was 4 then. One day she told my mom, "There is a lady in Michael's room." I froze. "A lady?" I asked. "Yes," she said. Tall hair in her face. "She watches me." Mom laughed nervously. Kids have active imaginations, but I could see in my sister's eyes that she wasn't lying. That day I started to realize my friend wasn't imaginary. The incidents continued for months. But one winter night, I'll never forget it, I woke up to the sound of dragging. Something moved across the floor, slowly, deliberately. I peeked through the blanket. 2 glowing red eyes stared at me from the corner. I couldn't move. My body froze. Slowly the eyes drew closer, and then vanished. But the scratches on the floor remained, fresh, deep, deliberate. I showed my mother in the morning. She didn't believe me. Her eyes were filled with worry, but she couldn't admit the truth. A few nights later, I woke up to my bedroom door half open. The hallway light was dim. In that light, a tall figure stood, completely still. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, the figure had entered my room. It was standing by my bed. I couldn't see its face, just the long hair and the height. It leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "I will never leave." I passed out. The next morning, I woke up on the floor. My hands were scratched as if someone had dragged me by my nails across the wooden planks. My mother said nothing. Her eyes, however, betrayed a silent fear. We moved out a few years later. But even now, at night, I hear faint whispers. Sometimes I feel a presence in the corner of my room, as if someone is watching me from the shadows. Years later, my sister mentioned something that chilled me to the bone. She said, "Remember the lady? She still comes to me in dreams. I never talk about it, but I know what I saw. I know what my sister saw. That childhood friend was never a friend." I grew up in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place people think of when they picture a safe childhood. Rows of houses with little yards, neighbors who waved, the distant sound of dogs barking or lawnmowers humming on a Saturday morning. On the surface, it looked perfect, but behind our house stood something that has haunted me for the rest of my life. A small, forgotten playground. It wasn't much. 2 old swings with rusty chains, a slide that had turned dull and rough from years of use, a sandbox that always smelled damp like it had just rained, even on the driest summer days. The place looked ordinary, but it had an atmosphere. Even as a kid, I felt it. The air was too still. The shadows stretched too long. My parents told me it was a blessing to have a playground so close. "You're lucky," my mom said once. "Most kids have to walk blocks to find a swing set." But I never felt lucky. I hated that playground, especially the swings. In the daylight, they stood there like any other swings. One red, one blue, paint peeling and chains creaking when you sat on them. But at night, things changed, because every night without fail, one swing would move on its own. The first time I thought it was the wind. I remember it clearly. I was 7, lying in bed one summer night. My window faced the backyard, and from there I could see straight to the swing set. The moon was out, bright enough to make everything silver. At first, nothing seemed strange. Then I noticed movement. One swing, the blue one, was pumping back and forth. Not a little gentle swaying, but full arcs, like someone invisible sat there, legs kicking, pushing it higher and higher. The red swing next to it hung perfectly still. I remember holding my breath, trying to make sense of it. If it was the wind, why wasn't the other swing moving? Why just one? The sound of squeaking chains cut through the night. Back and forth. Back and forth. I pulled my blanket over my head and prayed for sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. When I finally told my dad the next morning, he smiled and said, "It was probably just your imagination. You were half asleep, but it wasn't my imagination." A few nights later, I gathered enough courage to tell him again. This time I begged him to look for himself. Maybe I was desperate to prove I wasn't crazy. Maybe I wanted him to reassure me. So that night, my dad stood with me at the window. We both stared at the playground in the silvery light. At first, everything was calm. Both swings hung still. For a moment, I felt embarrassed. Maybe I really had imagined it. Then it started. The blue swing jerked forward, then back, slowly at first, then faster. The chains groaned as if holding a real weight. The seat tilted forward as though invisible legs were kicking. My dad didn't say a word. His jaw tightened, and I felt his hand on my shoulder tense. We stood there in silence as the swing pumped harder and harder. The red swing remained perfectly still. After a minute, he pulled the curtain shut. "Go to bed," he said, his voice low. He didn't explain. He didn't comfort me. He didn't even look at me. We never talked about it again. But from that night on, I knew. I wasn't imagining things. A few days later, something happened that proved it beyond doubt. That morning, I stepped into the backyard to play. The grass was wet with dew and the air smelled earthy. I glanced at the swing set, half expecting to see it moving even in daylight. It didn't, but what I did see made my stomach twist. Muddy footprints trailed from beneath the blue swing all the way to our back door. They were small, child-sized. I froze. I remember crouching down, touching the prints with my fingers. They were real, damp, and sharp in the morning grass. The line went straight to our steps, right to the door. Then they stopped. I called for my mom. She came out, saw the prints, and frowned. Maybe neighborhood kids snuck in last night. She said it too quickly, too casually, like she didn't believe her own words. That evening, I noticed she locked the back door twice. The next morning, the footprints were gone. But that night, the swing moved again. Weeks passed, and the swing never stopped. Every night it moved, sometimes slow and steady, sometimes violently, like whoever was on it was angry. The squeaking of the chains became part of my nights, a sound that crawled into my dreams. Sometimes I thought I heard laughter, soft, childlike giggles drifting through the air. Other times I swore I heard the sound of running feet across the grass. One night I woke to a new sound, tapping at the back door. 3 sharp knocks. I crept out of bed and peeked from the hall. I could see the door faintly in the moonlight. The knocks came again, louder this time. The next morning, more muddy prints stained the porch. After that, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining those small feet moving through our house, padding down the hall, stopping at my bedroom door. The sandbox was worse. One morning, I noticed something strange in it. The sand wasn't smooth anymore. It had been dug into as though little hands had clawed through it in the night. The marks were fresh, sharp lines across the damp sand. A few days later, I saw something buried there. A doll's head, filthy and cracked. It wasn't mine. I didn't recognize it at all. I remember showing my mom, expecting her to scream. Instead, she turned pale and whispered, "Don't touch it." Then she quickly buried the doll deeper in the sand, her hands shaking. That night, I heard the swing squeak louder than ever. It wasn't until years later that I learned the truth, but I'll never forget the first hint I got. One afternoon, I heard two of our neighbors talking. They didn't know I was listening. One whispered, "I can't believe that family moved in there. Don't they know?" The other shook her head. "The child. The one who—" She stopped when she saw me watching. Her lips pressed shut. I asked my mom about it, but she told me to stay out of grown-up conversations. Still, their words clung to me like shadows. The playground, the footprints, the laughter. Was it all connected to that child? By the end of summer, the dreams began. I would dream of the swing moving under a pale moon. In the dream, I could see a child sitting there. Not clearly, just the outline of a small figure, dark and heavy. The chains groaned as it swung higher, higher, until it felt like it would snap free. Sometimes in the dream, the child would turn. I could never see the face, but I could feel its eyes on me. I always woke drenched in sweat, heart racing. And the worst part? When I opened my eyes, the sound of the swing would still be there, drifting in through the window. Things escalated quickly after that. The swing didn't just move at night anymore. Sometimes even in the evening while the sun was still setting, I'd glance out and see it swaying. Not violently, but gently, as though whoever sat there was waiting. The sandbox grew worse too. More and more objects appeared buried in it. Broken toys, a shoe too small to fit anyone in our house, a cracked marble. My mom always buried them again, her lips tight, her eyes scared. One night, the knocking at the back door was so loud it woke the whole family. My dad stormed into the kitchen, yanked the door open, and shouted into the night. But there was no one there. Just the empty playground, the swing rocking back and forth in the moonlight. That was the first time I saw my father afraid. It was the footprints that terrified me most. Because one night, they didn't just stop at the back door, they continued inside, across the kitchen floor, into the hallway and toward my bedroom. I woke to the sound of creaking floorboards. I opened my eyes, and for a second I thought it was my dad coming to check on me. But then I saw them. Small wet prints leading from the hall to the foot of my bed. I froze, my body trembling, unable to move or scream. The air grew colder, my breath turning to mist, and then I heard it, a giggle, soft, right by my ear. The last night in that house is carved into my memory. The swing was louder than ever, the chains screeching like metal tearing apart. I stood at the window, paralyzed, watching it pump violently, and then suddenly it stopped, dead still. The silence was worse than the noise. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving from the swing toward the house. The grass crunched. The porch creaked, the back door rattled, and then it opened. I hid under my blanket, my heart hammering. The footsteps crossed the kitchen, the hallway, and finally entered my room. I felt the weight at the edge of my bed, pressing the mattress down. My blanket grew damp, cold seeping into me, and then the voice. "I've been waiting." I passed out. The next morning I woke on the floor. My blanket tangled, my hands scratched, dirt under my nails as though I had clawed at the wood. My parents said nothing, but their faces were pale, drawn. Within a week we moved out. We never spoke of the playground again. Not once, but I can't forget. I never will. I'm an adult now, far from that house. But every time I pass a playground, I find myself watching the swings. My stomach knots, my breath catches, and I wait. Most of the time they stand still. Both of them empty, silent, but sometimes once in a while I see one move. Not gently with the wind. Not swaying from a passing touch, but pumping. Hard. Like invisible legs are kicking. And every time it's only one swing. Just one. Like it's waiting. I don't usually talk about this. Not because I've forgotten it, no, some memories don't fade. They linger heavy and sharp like glass under the skin. I stay quiet because people don't believe me. And when they do, they look at me differently, like I'm cursed or broken or lying. But it wasn't me who lived it first. It was my sister. And it all began with a dollhouse, and she was 6 when she got it. A birthday present from my aunt wrapped in shiny paper with bright ribbons. I remember how her little hands trembled as she tore it open. squealing with joy when she saw what was inside. It wasn't just any toy. It was beautiful. Almost too beautiful for a child. A 2-story wooden dollhouse painted soft white with tiny blue shutters. The roof was a faded green, like copper touched by time. The front door had a little brass knob that actually turned, and each room inside had miniature furniture, beds, lamps, chairs, even little picture frames painted with faint flowers. But the strangest part, the detail that made it different from any other toy, was the mirrors. Each room had a small oval or square mirror fixed to the wall. Not stickers, not plastic. Real mirrors, polished and shining, reflecting everything back in perfect detail. Even as a kid, I thought it was odd. Toys don't usually have real glass. But my aunt just laughed when I asked. "Gives it character," she said. My sister didn't care. She was enchanted. She spent hours rearranging the furniture, putting little dolls into their places, creating entire families and stories. Sometimes she'd even talk to them as though the dolls could hear. At first, it was just that, a toy. Nothing more. The first time she noticed something strange, it was raining. I remember because the house smelled of damp earth and raindrops ran in crooked lines down the window beside her playmat. She was on the floor, cross-legged, playing quietly. I was nearby reading one of my school books when I heard her whisper, "That's not right." I looked up. "What isn't?" She tilted the dollhouse toward me. Her finger pressed against one of the tiny mirrors in the living room of the dollhouse. "Look," she said. I leaned in. At first I thought I was just seeing the miniature furniture reflected, but then my stomach dropped. The mirror wasn't reflecting the dollhouse at all. It was reflecting our living room, not the tiny version she had arranged with dolls and tables. No, the real one, the one we were sitting in, with the rain-streaked window, the faded couch, the scuffed wooden floor. I blinked hard, thinking it was a trick. Maybe the angle was catching the room behind me. But no, the dollhouse was facing the opposite direction. There was no way the mirror could reflect that. "Do you see it?" she asked, her voice a mix of wonder and unease. "Yeah," I whispered. My throat felt dry. We both stared at it, waiting, hoping it would flicker back to normal. But it didn't. And then something worse happened. For just a moment, a heartbeat. I saw a figure move across the reflection. A tall shadow gliding silently past the window. I spun around, heart racing. The real window behind us was empty. Only rain, only darkness, but in the dollhouse mirror, the shadow had been there. Kids are strange. Where I felt terror, she felt fascination. "That's funny," she giggled. "It's like the house is alive, alive." That word made my skin crawl. I wanted to take the dollhouse and throw it into the rain, smash it into splinters, but I didn't. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of the light. Maybe my eyes were tired from reading, but deep down I knew better. Over the next few weeks, the mirrors continued to show more than they should. At first, it was little things. Reflections of furniture moved slightly, even when the real room was untouched. A lamp that was on in the dollhouse mirror, though it sat unlit in the real world. A picture frame tilted in the reflection, though my mother swore she hadn't touched it. But soon, it grew worse. "There are more people in here," my sister told me one evening, her voice quiet. "What do you mean?" She pointed into the bedroom mirror inside the dollhouse. At first I saw only the reflection of her small dolls, but then in the corner I noticed a figure, a woman, her face blurred, hair hanging loose, shoulders hunched. Standing in the corner, watching, I gasped and pulled back. But when I looked around our real room, no one was there. "She comes back a lot," my sister whispered. "Sometimes she brings others." I wanted to scream at her to stop looking, to stop touching the cursed thing, but she was my little sister. Curious, innocent, unable to understand that some things aren't meant to be played with. And the dollhouse. It seemed to like her attention. It wasn't long before the whispers began. At first I thought it was the wind in the trees outside, or the faint hum of the old fridge in the kitchen. But at night, when the house was quiet, I could hear them clearly. Soft, urgent voices leaking from her room where the dollhouse sat. Sometimes it was laughter, sometimes sobbing, sometimes just a low murmur, like a conversation happening just beyond the wall. My sister admitted it to me one night, her small hand clutching mine tightly in the dark. "They talk to me," she whispered. "They say I should come play inside." I swallowed hard, every muscle in my body stiff. "Inside what?" The house. After that night, I couldn't look at the dollhouse without feeling sick. It sat there in my sister's room, delicate and beautiful, but every time I walked past her door, I felt those mirrors pulling at me, watching me. My sister, though, treated it like her closest friend. She played with it every day, whispering to her dolls, arranging the tiny furniture, staring into the mirrors for long stretches of time. Sometimes I'd find her sitting completely still, her face pale, just watching. When I asked her what she was looking at, she'd say, "They're moving again." I hated the way she said they. The first time I saw them clearly, it was late evening. I had gone into her room to get her for dinner. She was crouched on the floor, her face inches from one of the dollhouse mirrors. "They're having dinner too," she said without turning around. I froze. What? Come see, my gut told me to run, to tell Mom, to slam the door shut and never open it again. But against my better judgment, I knelt beside her and peered into the mirror. My blood ran cold. It was our kitchen, reflected perfectly. The table, the chairs, even the chipped bowl Mom always used for fruit. But there was more. People sat at the table. Not my mom, not me, not my sister. Strangers. Their faces were pale and blurry, as though smeared with fog, but their shapes were human. They sat stiffly, hands on the table, as if waiting for something. And then, one of them turned its head, slowly, toward me. I recoiled, nearly knocking the dollhouse over. "What the hell is that?" I gasped. My sister giggled softly like it was a game. "They said they're hungry." From that night onward, I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every sigh of the wind felt like footsteps or whispers crawling out from the dollhouse mirrors. Sometimes I would pass by her room and hear faint sounds, knocking, scratching, or worse, voices. Childlike giggles, low murmurs, faint sobbing. I begged my mom to take it away. "It's just a toy," she said, brushing me off. "Don't scare your sister." But Mom didn't see what I saw. She didn't see the way my sister's eyes looked hollow when she stared into the mirrors. She didn't hear the things my sister told me in the dead of night when she climbed into my bed trembling. "They want me to live with them," she whispered once, her voice quivering. "They said it's better there. Quieter. Warmer. No one yells." "No one yells?" I repeated, confused. "They said you don't understand yet," she murmured before drifting into uneasy sleep. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, terrified of the thought that my sister wanted to go inside. The worst came a few weeks later. I was half asleep when I heard her scream. I shot up, heart pounding, and ran to her room. She was standing in the middle of the floor, sobbing, pointing at the dollhouse. "She's here," she cried. "She's here again." I grabbed her shoulders, shaking her gently. Who's here?" "The lady," she wailed. "She's in the mirror, but she's not staying inside anymore." I turned to the dollhouse, dreading what I might see. And there it was. In one of the bedroom mirrors, the blurred woman stood again, hair hanging down, her face hidden. But this time, her arm was stretched forward, pressing against the glass, and the glass was bulging. I swear on my life, it wasn't flat anymore. The mirror swelled outward, as though the woman was trying to push her way through. The surface rippled faintly, like water disturbed by a stone. I stumbled back, nearly dragging my sister with me. Then, just as suddenly, it snapped back to normal. The mirror was still, flat, ordinary. But my sister wouldn't stop crying. She kept repeating the same words over and over. "She said she's coming. She said she's coming." For the first time, my mom started to notice something was wrong. She found my sister one afternoon sitting motionless before the dollhouse, her lips moving in silent conversation. When Mom called her name, she didn't respond. It took shaking her shoulder to break her trance. That night, I overheard my mother whispering to herself in the kitchen, voice trembling. I saw her. I saw someone standing in the mirror. It was the first time I realized it wasn't just me and my sister. Mom had seen it too. But instead of throwing the dollhouse away, she lit candles in every room and muttered prayers under her breath. She wouldn't admit it outright, but I think she was terrified. Terrified that whatever was inside the dollhouse mirrors wasn't just imagination. The final straw came one winter evening. Snow had piled high against the windows, muffling every sound outside. My sister and I were in the living room huddled under a blanket when we both heard it. Click, click, click. Tiny footsteps. We froze. The sound was coming from her room. Slowly, we crept to the doorway. Her dollhouse sat in the middle of the floor, moonlight spilling across it. And then, one of the tiny dolls moved. It wasn't my sister's hand. It wasn't mine. The doll turned its head slowly toward us. My sister whimpered and grabbed my hand. I felt her nails dig into my skin. The doll's tiny mouth opened, and though it shouldn't have been possible, a faint whisper drifted into the air. Come play with us. The night it finally happened was colder than any I could remember. The kind of cold that makes the air feel brittle, like it could shatter if you breathed too hard. I lay in bed, wide awake, listening, not for the wind, not for the pipes groaning in the walls, but for them, the whispers, the footsteps, the faint knocking from inside the dollhouse mirrors. At first, it was quiet, dead quiet, too quiet, and then, like always, it began. A faint tap. 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 But this time it wasn't coming from my sister's room. It was coming from my own mirror. I sat up so fast I nearly fell out of bed. The dresser stood across the room, its mirror faintly glowing in the moonlight. I stared at it, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But then I saw it and my reflection blinked. Before I did, I froze. My chest tightened. Slowly, I lifted my hand. My reflection lifted its hand too, but not in sync. It was a second too late. Then, it smiled. I didn't. I clamped my hands over my mouth to stop a scream, and that's when I heard it, the faintest sound of laughter, spilling from the glass. That was the moment I knew the mirrors weren't confined to the dollhouse anymore. The next night, my sister vanished. We were supposed to be asleep, but I woke to the sound of her giggling. At first, I thought she had snuck into the living room to play. I crept down the hall, calling her name in a whisper. No answer. Her room was empty. The blankets on her bed were thrown aside. Her dolls were scattered on the floor. And the dollhouse? The dollhouse door was open. Every tiny mirror inside shimmered faintly, like water rippling after a stone had been dropped. And in one of them, my sister's face, not her real face. Not flesh and blood. A reflection. Trapped behind the glass, her little hands pressing desperately against the inside of the mirror. She mouthed my name. I stumbled back, my throat burning with a scream I couldn't release. Behind her, shapes began to move. The blurred people, the woman with the hanging hair. They gathered around my sister like hunters circling prey. And then just as quickly, the image vanished. The mirrors were still again, empty. My sister was gone. I tried to tell Mom, but she didn't believe me. She's just hiding. You know how she plays, she said, her voice sharp with exhaustion, but I saw the fear in her eyes. The candles she'd lit days ago still burned, dripping wax down their sides, filling the air with the acrid scent of smoke. That night, she locked every door, every window, and sat clutching her rosary. She wouldn't let me out of her sight, but she never went into my sister's room. She wouldn't even look at the dollhouse anymore, and it was as if she thought ignoring it might make it go away. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of my sister's voice. Come play with me. It was faint, echoing. I bolted upright, my heart hammering. The sound came from the hallway. I followed, trembling, until I reached her room. The dollhouse glowed faintly in the dark. Its mirrors shimmered. And then, my sister stepped out. She crawled through the dollhouse door like it was a real one, her tiny body stretching impossibly from toy-sized to full-sized as she spilled onto the floor. But she wasn't right. Her skin was pale, too pale, her eyes wide and glassy. She smiled, but it was wrong, too wide, too sharp. Come play with us, she whispered, tilting her head unnaturally far to one side. I stumbled back, my legs trembling. You're not my sister, she giggled. The sound was hollow. She likes it better there. She doesn't want to come back. Behind her, the mirrors rippled. I saw hands pressing against them, dozens of hands reaching, clawing. The blurred people were closer now. The woman's face pressed against the glass, pale and cracked like porcelain. They wanted out. I don't know what came over me. Maybe fear, maybe rage, Maybe desperation. I grabbed the dollhouse, lifted it high, and slammed it against the floor. The sound was deafening. Wood splintered. Glass shattered. The tiny mirrors exploded into shards that scattered across the room. For a moment, everything was silent. And then, screaming, not from me, not from my mother, but from them. The voices shrieked from the broken mirrors, high-pitched and furious. The shards on the floor trembled, vibrating violently as though something inside was clawing to get out. The figure that wore my sister's face let out an unholy scream, then collapsed, writhing. Her body flickered, flesh to shadow, shadow to blur, blur to nothing. And just like that, she was gone. The room fell silent again, but my sister didn't come back. When my mom rushed in, she found me sobbing among the shards. The dollhouse nothing but a ruined skeleton of wood. She didn't yell. She didn't scold. She just knelt down, picked up a broken piece of the dollhouse, and whispered, "I told you not to look too long." I wanted to scream at her, to demand what she meant, but I couldn't. My voice was gone. My sister was gone, and the dollhouse was nothing but splinters. But even now, even as I write this, I swear I can still hear her. At night, when the house is quiet, I catch her laughter echoing faintly in the mirrors. After that night, the house felt empty, not just because my sister was gone, but because the air itself had changed. Every room echoed differently. The walls seemed to breathe. Even the silence carried weight, like something had been torn out of the house, leaving behind only hollow space. Mom stopped talking about her. She boxed up the toys, folded the tiny dresses, and locked the closet. But she never cried. Not once. She just moved slower, like her body carried more weight than it could bear. And me? I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the mirrors. I saw her face pressing against the glass, sometimes smiling, sometimes screaming, sometimes begging. I told myself I destroyed it, that the dollhouse was gone. But deep down, I knew better. You can't destroy a mirror. You can only break it into smaller ones. The pieces didn't stay still. At first, I thought it was paranoia. But when I checked the box where Mom had dumped the broken shards, some were missing. Just gone. Then I noticed them appearing in strange places. A tiny triangle of glass under my pillow. A sliver tucked between the pages of my school book. A shard on the bathroom sink glinting like a tooth. Every time I touched one, it felt warm, as if it had been held moments before by something live. And when I looked too long into the shards, I didn't see myself. I saw her, her lips moving silently, mouthing words I couldn't hear. Behind her, the shapes shifted, waiting. It didn't stop there. The voices came back, first as whispers, then as cries, then as screams that bled through the walls. They weren't just coming from the mirrors anymore. They came from the windows, the TV screen, the polished surface of the dining table. Anywhere a reflection could form. They waited, and one night I saw her again, not in the dollhouse, not in a shard, in the full-length hallway mirror. She stood there clear as day, wearing her favorite nightdress. Her hair was messy, her cheeks pale, but her eyes were wide with terror. She pressed her palms against the inside of the glass. "Please," she whispered. "You have to let me out." Tears stung my eyes. "How?" Her gaze flicked upward, toward the shadows gathering behind her. "Break it, please, before they—" Something yanked her back, hard. She screamed, her tiny hands clawing at the surface as if it were ice she was sinking beneath. And then, gone. My own reflection stared back at me, trembling. I punched the glass. It didn't crack. Not even a scratch. That's when I realized. The dollhouse hadn't been the prison. It had been the key. The next morning, I confronted Mom. My voice shook as I asked the question I had been terrified to speak. "What did you mean that night, when you said you told me not to look too long?" Her hands froze over the sink. Slowly, she turned to me. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from lack of sleep. She looked older, thinner, as if the years had devoured her overnight. "I had a dollhouse too," she whispered. The words sent ice through my veins. "When I was a girl, my mother gave it to me. Same mirrors, same faces, same voices. They took my brother." She grabbed my shoulders so hard it hurt. "They always take one. One child per generation. That's the price. If you destroy the dollhouse, it doesn't matter. They find another way in. The mirrors never die, her voice cracked. This time it was her. I staggered back, shaking my head in disbelief. You knew? Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence was enough. That night I didn't try to sleep. I sat in front of the hallway mirror waiting. Hours passed. My reflection stared back at me. Still. Silent. And then, her face appeared beside mine. Not my reflection. Hers. My sister. Only this time, she wasn't screaming. She was smiling, but it wasn't a child's smile. It was too wide, too sharp, the kind of smile that doesn't belong on a human face. She leaned close to the glass and whispered, "It's your turn." And before I could move, before I could breathe, a hand shot out of the mirror. Not hers, something else's. It was pale, cracked like porcelain with too many fingers. It clamped around my wrist and pulled. I screamed. I clawed at the frame. My nails split, my skin tore, but it kept dragging me closer. For a moment, my face touched the glass, and it was cold, colder than anything I'd ever felt. And then you expect me to tell you I escaped. That I broke free. That I woke up and realized it was all a nightmare. But nightmares end. This didn't, because every time I pass a mirror now I see her. Sometimes she's a child. Sometimes she's older. Sometimes she looks exactly like me. And sometimes, I can't tell which reflection is mine anymore. So if you ever see a mirror and the reflection smiles a second too late, don't smile back because it isn't you, and it isn't me. Wow, it's them, waiting,